Think about someone you have a strong bond with. In these relationships, you share, sometimes you give things, you receive things, and these bonds help us to feel safe and secure. Atoms also form bonds with other atoms. Today, we're going to learn about why atoms form bonds. We're going to learn about the different types of bonds, and we're going to learn about the various properties of these bonds. So why do atoms bond? Atoms bond to complete their valence shells, and they follow something called the octet rule. So remember our Bohr model, and when we build, let's do lithium, and then lithium, we got to balance out its electrons. And so notice lithium has one valence electron. What it wants to do is it wants to have a complete valence shell. So lithium will go around looking to form bonds with other elements. That way it has a complete valence shell. What lithium will do is it will actually give away an electron so that way it can look like the noble gas helium. Let's look at another example. Let's look at oxygen. Now notice oxygen has 6 valence electrons in its last shell, and it would like to have 8, right? This is the octet rule. And so it would like to get 2 electrons. And so it would get electrons when it forms bonds. And so this is what oxygen would like to be like. Oxygen would like to be like the noble gases on the periodic table. So all the elements want to be like the noble gases. So here we see in group 18, the elements want to be like these guys, the noble gases on the periodic table. So that is why atoms form bonds. All right, so let's talk about the different types of bonds that elements form. The first one is the covalent bond. Second one is ionic bonds. And finally, metallic bonds. Let's talk about some differences between them. Covalent bonds is when a non-metal combines with another non-metal. Ionic bonds, on the other hand, is when a non-metal combines with another metal. So ionic bonds, non-metal, and metal. And as you might guess, metallic bonds are formed when a metal bonds with another metal. We're not really going to cover the properties of metallic bonds. We are going to cover the properties of ionic and covalent bonds. So let's talk about the properties. A covalent bond happens when a nonmetal shares electrons with another nonmetal. So nonmetal, nonmetal, they form bonds. This is an example of what happens. A chlorine atom will find another chlorine atom and they'll share a valence electron. So both of them thinks they have complete valence shells. Now, there are 2 types of covalent bonds. The first one, nonpolar, and this is when the electrons are shared equally, and this happens usually with identical nonmetals. And the reason why this is because they have similar electronegativity. The second type of covalent bonds is a polar covalent bond. And this is when electrons are shared unequally between 2 different nonmetals, and this results in a partial opposite charge. This happens because elements on the periodic table, the nonmetals, they have different amounts of electronegativity. So an atom with a large amount of electronegativity will pull the electron a little bit closer to itself, and this results in the opposite charge. All right, so let's take a look here and tell me what you notice. So first off, this is sucrose, so this is sugar, and it is put together by the covalent bond. So let's see what happens when we put it in water. All right, so notice what happens. Notice they break apart a little bit, but they don't break into individual atoms. And so therefore, covalent bonds are not soluble in water. Let's take a look at another example. So we're going to add sugar again. And now we're adding it to water, just like earlier. But we are going to check the conductivity. So we're going to see if this completes the circuit. So as you can see, no matter how much sugar I put, this doesn't complete the flow of electrons, right? It doesn't complete the circuit. So covalent bonds are not conductive in water or even in a solid form. Now this makes sense, right? Covalent bonds happen between nonmetals and other nonmetals. Nonmetals are not conductive, so that makes sense. As we saw, covalent bonds are not soluble in water. They do not conduct electricity in an aqueous solution, which is a water solution, or in solid form. So they don't conduct electricity at all. They have a low melting point, and they have a low boiling point. Ionic bonds, on the other hand, are formed when metals transfer an electron to a nonmetal. So metal forms a bond with a nonmetal. An example would be sodium and chlorine. Sodium has low ionization energy, and so it will give away an electron very easily, right? It doesn't want to hold on to that electron. It wants to just give it away. Chlorine, on the other hand, has a high electronegativity, and so it really, really wants an electron. So sodium doesn't really want it. It's like, here, you could take it. Just take my electron. I don't really want it. And therefore, an ionic bond forms. And this difference in charge is what keeps them together. Let's see if sodium dissolves in water, if it's soluble in water. So let me shake up my salt shaker right here. Shake, 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 shake. Is that all the salt I get? I guess that's all the salt I get. So what happens with atoms that form ionic bonds is that they actually break up into individual atoms. So therefore, ionic bonds are soluble in water. All right, so let's see if salt conducts electricity. Notice, as I add salt, it actually conducts electricity in an aqueous solution, in a water solution. Now, it's important to note that atoms that form ionic bonds, they won't conduct electricity without being in an aqueous solution. Properties of ionic bonds: they're soluble in water, meaning they'll dissolve. They are conductive in an aqueous solution. They have a high melting point and a high boiling point. Now, the final property of ionic bonds is that their structure is known as a crystal lattice. So this is basically a repeating structure. Today you learned why atoms form bonds, the types of bonds, and you learned about the properties of bonds.